NASCAR is a sport that's been around for a long time, and it has a strong history and traditions. However, the way the sport is today is quite different from its earlier days. In the past, it was much riskier, and there weren't as many rules to keep the drivers safe. But there was an event that played a big role in changing this. Keep watching to discover what the event was.
Oh, look out! Oh, and upside down is Earnhardt! This is going to be a mess!
NASCAR racing at super speedways during the late 80s was quite different compared to today. The style of racing itself has undergone a significant shift. Currently, we often see tightly packed groups of cars racing closely together, while in the past, the cars were more spread out in a single file formation. The racing back then wasn't dull and in a single line, but due to the very high speeds, the cars naturally ended up more separated. The most notable difference lies in the speeds reached by the cars. For instance, the pole position speed for the 2022 Daytona 500, set by Kyle Larson, was 180 miles per hour, which is undeniably fast. However, NASCAR fans would rightly argue that this isn't quite as thrilling as it used to be. In the 1987 NASCAR season, things were at their quickest. The post-speed record for the Daytona 500 was an astonishing 210.3 miles per hour, established by Bill Elliott. This is nearly 30 miles per hour faster than the speed seen in recent years. But why has NASCAR become slower over time? It's not due to a decline in technology or the skills of the drivers. The reason can be traced back to a single moment that completely transformed the direction of NASCAR. It shifted from being all about pushing the limits of speed and taking daring risks.
It's going to be a drag race! Wow! They touch!
To a sport that prioritizes safety over all else. Let's go back to February 1987, right before the Daytona 500 race. The drivers were getting ready, knowing they would be going really fast, but they weren't sure exactly how fast. Bill Elliott, who held the record for the fastest Daytona 500 pole position at 205 miles per hour, didn't think a car could reach 210 miles per hour in race conditions. Surprisingly, when Bill Elliott did his first qualifying lap, he actually averaged 210 miles per hour. He was surprised and relieved when it was over. He mentioned that he got a bit shaky in turns 3 and 4, so he decided not to do a second lap. He felt like his foot was telling his brain that going that fast was crazy. But it wasn't just Bill Elliott who had this incredible speed. In fact, all the drivers in the top 10 qualifying positions would have gone faster than Bill's previous record of a little over 205 miles per hour. In only his 9th race, Davey Allison earned a spot at the front row by going faster than 209 miles per hour on average. This was a big achievement, and he even did better than his father, Bill Elliott, who was a well-known racer. During the race, Bill Elliott led for more than half of the time and left the other racers behind. What was even more relieving was that after the race, there weren't any major accidents. This was a huge relief because at such high speeds, any accident could have been very dangerous. Daytona was considered the most dangerous track in NASCAR at that time. Sadly, in the past, 8 drivers had lost their lives at Daytona.
Oh, we got trouble! Terrible crash!
And during the same weekend as the 1987 Daytona 500, a driver named Joe Young from the Goodies Dash series had passed away. Now that the drivers had safely finished the Daytona race, they moved on to Talladega for the 9th race of the season. Talladega was considered quite risky too, but it had only seen 2 deadly accidents throughout its history. Surprisingly, even though the speeds were faster at Talladega, there was something about the Daytona track that made it more perilous for drivers. Now let's talk about the Winston 500 race at Talladega in 1987. The week leading up to this race was pretty similar to the events before the Daytona 500. Bill Elliott again outperformed himself by setting a new record for the fastest single lap in qualifying. His speed was the quickest ever seen in NASCAR history, 212.8 miles per hour. This marked Elliott's 5th consecutive pole position at Talladega. Davey Allison, who had been Bill Elliott's main competition throughout the week, had some trouble. He blew his qualifying engine during practice earlier that day, and as a result, he only managed to secure the 3rd position on the starting grid. Davey's father, Bobby Allison, did well and got a spot in the front row, but he was still a bit slower than Bill Elliott. At the beginning of the race, things went mostly as expected. Bill Elliott was leading and doing really well. However, Bobby Allison managed to pass Bill Elliott on the 19th lap. But not long after that, something significant happened.
Oh, we have a problem!
Suddenly, there was a big problem on the track. Bobby Allison was in a really bad crash right on the front stretch. The crash was so severe that it tore down a whole section of the protective railing. Another driver named Alan Kulwicki also got involved in the crash. Bobby Allison was in 5th place when his car's engine had a major issue. This caused his car to spin out and even went up in the air before crashing into the catch fence. Some parts from his car's engine cut his tires, making things even worse. The crash was so intense that it took down almost 100 feet of the fence, and 9 other cars got caught up in the chaos because they were trying to avoid Bobby's car. Thankfully, Bobby Allison wasn't hurt in the crash. He managed to get out of his car and walk away on his own. The safety crews quickly came to help him. Bobby recalled that they put him in a safety vehicle, which then drove slowly around the racetrack to reach the infield hospital.
Bobby Allison with a horrible crash here on the front stretch. It has torn out a complete section.
Fortunately, the damage wasn't as bad as they initially thought, but 5 fans still got hurt and needed medical care. 3 of them were treated at the care center at the track, and 2 had to go to a local hospital. Sadly, one of those fans lost an eye due to flying debris. This was really tough for the fans and their families, but by a stroke of luck, a real tragedy was avoided. In interviews and documentaries about the crash, many NASCAR drivers and officials openly say that NASCAR was very close to having to stop the sport entirely because of this incident. When you watch a replay, you can see that Bobby Allison's car hit the outer wall first and then collided with the catch fence, which absorbed a lot of the impact. If his car had hit the catch fence directly at a different angle, there's a good chance it could have gone through the fence and into the stands where the spectators were sitting. It's not a pleasant idea to think about, but NASCAR had to deal with this concern right away. When they returned to Talladega for the second time in 1987, they came up with a temporary solution. They made a rule that required using smaller carburetors, which made the cars go slower. In that race, Bill Elliott's pole speed was just under 204 miles per hour. This was a big difference of more than 8 miles per hour from the spring race. The following year in 1988, NASCAR decided to use a solution called a restrictor plate. They attached this plate under the carburetor of the car's engine. This plate restricted the amount of air that could reach the engine. This change reduced the speeds of the cars, but it also led to cars grouping closely together at superspeedways.
Ernie Evans wins and Rusty spins and gets airborne.
This type of racing was quite different from what we see today, and it made big crashes more common on these tracks. However, NASCAR believed that this approach was safer. They thought it was better to have multiple cars involved in a crash than to risk a single car crashing into the catch fence at speeds as high as 210 miles per hour. As NASCAR returned to Talladega in the spring of 1988, Bill Elliott's pole speed was now under 199 miles per hour. Over time, the top speeds during pole qualifying at Talladega varied. In 1989, it dropped to a little over 193 miles per hour, then went back up to almost 200 miles per hour in 1990. The speeds went up and down like a roller coaster every year, and it's become a topic of discussion every few years since then. Figuring out the right balance between speed and safety has been an ongoing debate. Fans, as well as NASCAR's leaders, have different opinions on what's the best way to handle pack racing. But when unsure, it's probably better to prioritize safety. With pack racing, there have been some crashes that harmed fans, like Jeff Gordon's crash in 2000 at Daytona, Austin Dillon's crash in 2015 at Daytona, and Carl Edwards' crash at Talladega, among others. However, imagine how much worse these accidents could have been if there weren't restrictor plates in place due to NASCAR's initiative. Bobby Allison's crash also comes to mind as an example of how dangerous high speeds without safety measures can be. In the bigger picture, things could have been much worse if the speeds were even higher, considering NASCAR was getting faster during that time. Overall, NASCAR was really fortunate on this day, and it led to some important safety improvements. While it didn't directly lead to roof flaps, this crash did play a role in starting the process of developing them. But let's talk about how the 1987 Winston 500 race ended. It actually has quite a positive ending. The race was paused for more than 2.5 hours to repair the damaged fence. Since darkness was approaching, the race would have to be made shorter by 10 laps. Bobby Allison was understandably shaken after the crash and wanted to leave the track, but his wife convinced him to stay and support their son Davey. In the race, Davey Allison performed exceptionally well. He led for more than 100 laps. When Bill Elliott had to drop out of the race with 28 laps to go, it helped Davey's position. Towards the end of the race, Davey had a close battle with Dale Earnhardt, but he managed to come out on top. This victory marked Davey's first win in NASCAR's top division, and it was only his 14th race. Davey expressed that seeing his dad crash into the fence was a really emotional moment for him. After the race, he mentioned, "It was the saddest moment of my life." The irony is strong. Bobby had experienced one of the worst days in his racing career, while his son Davey had his very first win. This, along with their 1-2 finish in the 1988 Daytona 500, will always be remembered as one of the most special father-son moments in the history of the sport. Did you know about this crash? Let us know in the comments below.
And the 99 has turned over Brad Keselowski.